For most of the last 70 years, if you asked a contractor why he ran yellow iron, he would not have started with the machine. He would have told you about the dealer. Somebody was there in hours. A part could be found. A technician knew your site, knew your foreman, and knew which of your machines was on the critical path this week. That network was the reason Caterpillar could charge more than everybody else and keep the customer anyway. It was one of the great competitive moats in industrial history, and it was completely real. Nobody should pretend otherwise. It was also expensive to build, and slow. Depots had to be stocked before the customers existed. Technicians had to be trained before there was enough work to keep them busy. For decades, Caterpillar carried that cost on purpose, and the reason competitors could not simply copy it was that copying it meant losing money for 20 years first. That is worth restating, because it is the part people forget when they criticize this company. Building that network was one of the great acts of industrial patience of the 20th century. Somebody at Caterpillar, decades ago, accepted 20 years of unprofitable depots in order to create an advantage that would last 50. The company that did that was not a company run by quarterly thinking. Now go and read what operators write about that same network today. Dealer consolidation, service delay, parts wait, downtime. It is the third largest complaint theme in this channel's comment corpus. 9 separate people raising it without being asked. And the tone is not disappointment. It is something closer to grievance, which is what happens when a promise that was kept for decades stops being kept. One man who spent years buying equipment for mining operations laid out the mechanism in plain language. Corporate screwed over the local dealerships, he wrote, in preference for fewer company-owned dealerships. The problem was that the local dealerships were on site starting repairs within hours. The new ones took days to respond. Businesses cannot wait days for their machines to get back to work. That is the whole inversion in 4 sentences, written by somebody who watched it happen from the buying side. And notice what he does not say. He does not say the new dealers were staffed by worse people, or that the parts were inferior, or that the prices went up. He says the response time went from hours to days, and that his business could not absorb the difference. That is a structural complaint, not a service complaint. The strange part is that every step of it was defensible on its own. Consolidating dealers reduces duplicated overhead. Centralizing dispatch improves utilization of technicians. Standardizing service processes improves consistency and makes performance measurable across regions. Moving diagnostics behind a controlled software layer protects emissions compliance and warranty exposure. Every one of those is a sound argument. Any competent operations executive would make them, and most would be right. This is what makes the failure so hard to catch from inside. There is no meeting where somebody proposes damaging the customer relationship. There is a sequence of meetings, over several years, each one improving a measurable thing, and the damage accumulates in the space between the measurements. The trouble is, what happens when you stack all of them on top of a business whose entire value proposition was a man turning up before you had to ask? Here is the arithmetic that nobody at head office is looking at, and it is the reason this keeps happening. Before we go further, if you run the iron or turn the wrenches on it, subscribe and turn on the bell. A centralized service operation produces numbers, response time averages, tickets closed per technician, revenue per machine in the field, utilization rates. All of that goes in a deck, and all of it can be improved quarter on quarter. A regional technician who knows that one of his customers is inside a pour window and who turns up on his own initiative before the phone rings produces no number at all. He just produces a customer who never leaves. Loyalty of that kind is nearly impossible to value, which, in a numbers-driven organization, means it gets valued at 0. Not deliberately, just by omission, because there is no field on the form for it. On a spreadsheet, that man looks like slack in the system. He is underutilized. His territory is inefficient, and so, eventually, somebody optimizes him away, and every number on the deck improves in the quarter that follows. The cost lands 2 or 3 years later, in a market share table, by which point the person who made the decision has been promoted. That lag is the real villain of this story, more than any executive. A feedback loop with a 3-year delay cannot be managed by a system that reviews itself every 90 days, and no amount of good intent inside the company closes that gap. If you want to know how far this goes, The best evidence in the entire comment corpus is not about construction equipment at all. The single most liked comment under this channel's most watched video, 403 likes, was written by a man in Germany whose wife works as an X-ray assistant in a large hospital. For years, he wrote, their imaging equipment was General Electric. Regional service technicians were responsible for specific hospitals. They were extremely responsive when a machine went down. Some of them would simply call in when they were nearby to check that everything was working. Then service centers were introduced somewhere else in the world. No more direct calls to the technician. Every call required the same information to be given again, information that was already in the system. Downtime increased. The technicians who came no longer knew the site or the machines installed in it. Every machine in that hospital is Siemens today. He added one line at the end that is almost too neat. I assume General Electric had somebody improving the processes for cost optimization. He was not being sarcastic. He was describing, from the customer side, exactly what a successful efficiency program looks like from the outside. That comment appeared under a video about excavators, and 400 people recognized it instantly because they had watched the identical process on their own job sites with a different logo on the truck. Now here is the uncomfortable part, for Caterpillar specifically, and it is the reason this is a strategic problem rather than a customer service problem. A moat is only a moat while nobody else is digging one, and moats decay in a particular way. They do not collapse. They get charged for. The moment an advantage becomes a revenue line rather than a reason to buy, it stops defending the position and starts funding the quarter, and those are opposite jobs. A network that exists to keep customers is expensive. A network that exists to monetize them is profitable, right up until the customers finish leaving. A viewer under the mining truck video worked this out several years ahead of most analysts. If the new electric trucks take too long to develop, he wrote, or the early generations are not well received, then by the time Caterpillar can get a suitable product out, Liebherr could have a dealer and service network advantage. The same thing that gave Caterpillar an advantage. 29 people liked it. It is the sharpest thing anybody has said about this company in that comment section, and it came from a viewer rather than a bank. The service network was never a law of nature. It was depots, stock, trained people, and a promise about response times, and any competitor willing to spend 2 decades building the same thing takes it. Komatsu has been building it. So has Liebherr, and they are building it at exactly the moment the incumbent decided its own version was a profit center. In Canada and Australia, you can already hear the result in how operators talk. Komatsu is king nowadays, one wrote. Another named the site. Sparwood is Komatsu. A third described an oil sands operation moving to Komatsu autonomous trucks and then to larger Hitachi units. None of them mention price. You can see the pressure of all this arriving in the financial numbers now, which is usually the last place it shows up. On the 27th of July, 2026, Erste Group cut Caterpillar from buy to hold. The analyst, Hans Engel, gave 2 reasons. The stock had run 107% in a year and was trading at a price-to-earnings ratio of 43.9, and in the most recent quarter, both gross margin and operating margin fell year over year. The shares dropped 4% that Monday. Caterpillar reports its second quarter results on August the 4th. Margins are worth understanding correctly here because they are the number that reports this particular problem first. A company charging more for the same service records that as margin expansion. A company whose customers have started quietly buying elsewhere records nothing at all until the volume moves, and volume moves last. So the margin line falling year over year, in a business that has spent a decade monetizing service, is not a small signal. It is also the one number that a service-led strategy is supposed to protect. Aftermarket revenue is meant to be the stable, high-margin annuity that carries a cyclical equipment business through the downturns. If margins are compressing while that annuity is being harvested harder than ever, something upstream of the accounting has started to move. None of this means the dealer network is gone. It is still, in absolute terms, the deepest in the industry, and on a remote site, it is still worth paying for. Any contractor in a thin county will tell you that, and they will be right. What has changed is that it is no longer a reason customers cannot leave. It is now a reason some of them stay, which is a much weaker thing, and it costs the same to run. That distinction is the entire strategic problem in one line. The network still carries its full cost base. What it no longer carries is the certainty that the customer has nowhere else to go, and that certainty was the thing that justified the premium price for 70 years. Subscribe if you want more of these. This channel covers the real story behind the machines, the part the dealer never puts in the brochure. That is what happens when the greatest advantage a company ever had gets pointed at the customer instead of aimed at the competition. The man who described corporate replacing local dealers with company-owned ones was not making a prediction. He was describing something that had already happened to him, and the only open question left is how many years pass before it shows up in a number somebody in Peoria is measured on.